Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Children's Cancer Research Fund's inaugural Partners for Progress celebration. I'm Kenna Dooley, the one who forgot her name tag, so I'm Kenna Dooley, Chief Development Officer at CCRF, and it's truly wonderful to see so many of you here, families, supporters, and partners who believe in a future where every child has access to safer, more effective treatments for cancer. Thank you. And tonight is all about celebrating the impact of this community and especially the role that our partners play in fueling discoveries. Together, we will reflect on all that's been accomplished and hear from the brilliant minds working every day to change the outlook for kids and families. In 2025, nearly 20% of our total funding is made up of corporate donations. One notable advancement fueled by corporate support is expanded access to a clinical trial for children with relapsed acute myeloid leukemia happening at the University of Minnesota Masonic Children's Hospital. And many of you here tonight were a key part of that trial moving forward, so thank you. Your continued belief in this mission is what turns promising ideas like this in the lab into real progress for children facing cancer. It is now my honor to introduce someone who leads CCRF with deep commitment and passion. Please join me in welcoming our Chief Executive Officer, Elizabeth Allen.
Thanks, Kenna. Is this thing on? Okay. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for your support. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Bendel and Dr. Turcotte and share more about the impact of what we do every day. Every milestone we celebrate today is possible because of individuals and partners like all of you. Whether it's investing in research, creating opportunities for collaboration, or championing our cause in our communities, you're helping us move faster towards cures and safer treatments for kids. And we're especially honored tonight to be joined by two incredible leaders in the field who embody this mission in their daily work. Both of them have very impressive resumes, but part of their resume that I am deeply proud of is they were both once funded their fellowships by CCRF. So it's working, guys. And CCRF has just committed to the University of Minnesota for another 10 years of funding fellowships. And their fellowship program at the University of Minnesota will now be named the Children's Cancer Research Fund Hematology Oncology. I think I got those in the right order. Hematology Oncology Fellowship Program. And we're extraordinarily proud of that. That will mark 50 years of fellows at the University of Minnesota, all made possible from projects. So first, Dr. Lucie Turcotte. Dr. Turcotte is a pediatric hematologist oncologist at the University of Minnesota and former CCR fellow, where she serves as division director of the pediatric hematology oncology and director of the survivorship program. Her research centers on survivorship, studying how cancer therapies impact children and adolescents long-term, with the goal of creating safer, more effective treatments. Families trust her not only for her expertise, but for her commitment to improving both today's care and tomorrow's outcomes. And with the support of CCRF, Dr. Turcotte has advanced important studies that address some of the most pressing challenges facing childhood cancer survivors. And many of you have met Kelly Acker, our Director of Partnerships. Another thing that we'd like to add to her resume is that Dr. Turcotte was Kelly's daughter Harriet's doctor when she went through treatment at the University. So we're eternally grateful for that as well. In 2017, CCRF funded support of Dr. Turcotte's work on the impact of childhood obesity on early markers of cancer risk and treatment resistance. And in 2021, she received support to examine how race, socioeconomic status, and hospital characteristics contribute to outcome disparities among children with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Today, she continues to lead the way in survivorship research as the Children's Cancer Research Fund Lehman Family Chair in Pediatric Cancer Research. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. We're also joined by Dr. Ann Bendel. Dr. Bendel is a pediatric hematologist-oncologist at Children's Minnesota, where she leads as director of the neuro-oncology program and holds the Harper Family Foundation Endowed Chair for Cancer Research and Novel Therapies. She has dedicated nearly 30 years of her career to caring for children and young adults. We'll let that go by. With brain and central nervous system tumors. Dr. Bendel is deeply committed to both patient care and advancing research. She collaborates across specialties and leads clinical studies to ensure her patients have access to the most innovative therapies available. Upcoming with CCRF funding through the Shook Top Advisor Summit, she is leading a groundbreaking trial testing a novel combined vaccine therapy for children with malignant brain tumors, an effort that brings new hope for families facing some of the most difficult diagnoses. And now, let's dive into why we're all here today. During our panel, please feel free to use the cards at the table to jot down any questions you may have, as we intend to save time at the end to answer them. And they were asking if I might go off script. I don't know enough about medicine because I'm not a doctor, so I said I don't know enough to go off script. So they know some of these questions ahead of time. There have been some significant changes over the past decade or so in childhood cancer and how it's treated. From each of your point of view, what are one of the two most significant changes that have occurred?
Wow, I mean, I think there's been so many when you look at the last 20 years. One of the things that I think has been really amazing is our ability to really do molecular characterization of the cancer. So actually looking at the genetics of the cancer and understanding some of the specific characteristics, and then being able to develop therapies that are more targeted to those types of cancers. It really has changed our ability to look at risk stratification, so how a child is likely to respond to therapy and prescribe the very best therapy for it.
And I was going to say the same thing because it is probably the biggest advancement that we've made, and it has not only made us be able to get the most accurate diagnosis, but it's allowed us to be able to look at prognostic genetic changes, and that has allowed us to choose treatments better. We used to diagnose cancers off of what it looked like under the microscope, and that was even just 10, 15 years ago. And then now we look at it under the microscope still, but then we look at all the genetic makeup of it, and suddenly this tumor that fit as into the category of medulloblastoma now could be one of multiple different subtypes, and even within those subtypes, there are molecular and genetic changes that affect the prognosis of that patient. And so it has made us have more accurate diagnoses. It has very much affected the treatment because we don't want to undertreat a patient, but we don't want to overtreat a patient either. So if all we knew was medulloblastoma, they all get aggressive chemotherapy and aggressive radiation, and they all have significant long-term side effects with cognitive impairment, short stature, risk for second malignancies. But if we can know, they fit into a good risk category, then we reduce the dose of radiation, maybe even avoid radiation, and then they can be cognitively normal, hopefully. And we then sometimes need to up the chemotherapy to be able to reduce the radiation, but sometimes we can decrease the chemotherapy too. So it's been very important in being able to treat patients to give the best outcomes, both cure rate and decrease the long-term side effects.
And what do you see as one of the most important unanswered questions in pediatric cancer today?
I'll go first because you might say this. And I don't have an answer for this unanswered question, but I think to me it's why do these cancers develop? I mean, we definitely know that there are inherited reasons, and we know there's some environmental reasons. In pediatrics, actually, there aren't that many environmental reasons. Smoking, drinking, all that can cause if the kids don't do that. And we know that radiation and chemotherapy both can cause cancers, and then some inherited syndromes, but that's really all we know. And so if we could figure out why these cancers develop, who is going to be at risk for developing them, then we could catch it earlier, or maybe even prevent it if we understood better why they form.
Yeah, there's so many puzzlers still. I think one of the things to me that's most challenging is understanding why cancers that can look identical by under the microscope, by their genetics, all of the pieces, why some respond well to chemotherapy and treatment and some don't. I think as an oncologist, that's probably one of the most challenging pieces, is not being able to predict well which child will relapse or which child won't respond to therapy effectively. And we feel like we have so many more tools than we've ever had before, and yet there's still children that we feel like we're failing. And it's not us failing, it's the cancer eluding us still. But it's such a challenge when you meet a family and you feel like you're giving them the very best opportunities for their child to do well, and for some reason they don't. And so to me, when we can even better predict how children will do long term, that will be, and that's the ultimate goal.
That's great. So on that note, research has dramatically improved the survival rates for many childhood cancers. And excited to say now there are more than 500,000 survivors of pediatric cancer living in the United States. Can't wait to cross that million mark. You know. This is amazing, but also many of these survivors, as you've mentioned, have long-term health challenges. How are researchers working now to improve survivors' long-term outcomes?
I think one of the things is what Dr. Bendel alluded to. It's really that risk stratification and being able to remove some of the toxicity from the treatments up front. So if you can omit radiation from treatments or omit some of the types of chemotherapies from treatments, you're automatically putting them at an advantage down the road for having better long-term outcomes. And then I think as a community of survivorship researchers, we've kind of gone to figure out, after children have finished therapy, how do we best monitor them and manage them? So one of my roles is leading the Children's Oncology Group second malignancy long-term follow-up guideline development. And so we now look at all of the literature, all of the things that are out there, and we develop screening guidelines so that after children finish therapy and they come to see us in survivorship clinic, we can help determine what the most effective way is to screen them, to follow them long-term, so that if they do develop long-term complications, we catch them really early and are able to intervene really early. And I think the other piece, and the piece that I'm really excited about that we're doing within my research team at the University of Minnesota, is really trying to personalize survivorship. So we're developing risk prediction models where we are able to take really detailed information from a child's treatment and develop these risk prediction models so that we can actually calculate out what the percentage likelihood is of developing certain late effects or certain long-term complications, and really incorporating that into their long-term follow-up plan so that we know what are the things that we need to be watching for most closely and what are the things that, you know, hopefully this child doesn't have to worry about long-term.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing else I would add, and once again, I'm a brain tumor oncologist, and so brain tumor survivors have a ton of long-term side effects. And so we have multiple studies where actually one of the purposes is to try to reduce the side effect, and hopefully maintain the cure, but you know, people want to have a good quality of life if they're going to survive. And so actually my partner, Margaret Shatara, is running a study through our Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium that is using laser interstitial thermal therapy, which is a newer surgical tool where surgery actually causes a fair amount of the side effects, at least the neurological side effects that we see. And so it's a study where instead of opening up the brain, going through it, removing the tumor, it's used as a probe that you just put a little hole in the skull and you put a probe through, and then you target the lesion, and then under MRI, that can look at the heat that that tissue is receiving. It heats the probe, and then you can see this rim, this circle of ablated tissue. So it's really ablating, zapping, killing that tissue, and then when it reaches the area, the whole circumference of the tumor, then it quickly cools down to then stop the destruction. And so the purpose of that is to be able to have a surgical tool that doesn't have as many long-term side effects. So we're looking at that for our patients with low-grade gliomas that have recurrence. We have studies that are looking at the cognitive outcomes, like we talked about, stratifying treatment to try to minimize radiation, but we also have, we're using, actually this study just closed, but it's where it shows oncology group looking at memantine, which is used in Alzheimer's to help retain cognitive function, particularly memory, and we're using it in patients that have radiation, and in the adult world, it looks like that helps improve their cognitive function. And so we're hoping it's going to do the same in our pediatric cases. We have a trial through Children's Oncology Group using something called sodium thiosulfate, which in the early studies looks like it helps preserve hearing. We use a lot of cisplatin and radiation, and 50% or more of our medulloblastoma young survivors have significant hearing loss, which is has a huge impact on their development, especially if they already have cognitive impairment. And so that study is using this medicine when you give cisplatin, and it seems to protect the hearing, but yet doesn't protect the cancer. So the cancer is still able to be treated. And so we have lots of different studies that are trying to find it. Oh, and then we recently started a fertility because so when many of our chemotherapies cause infertility. And if you're an adult and you're a woman, you can have your eggs saved. You can have sperm saved if you're a man. Actually, in little girls, you can actually freeze a ovary, and that can be potentially successful to have a child in the future. But we have nothing for boys that don't make sperm. And so in animal models and even in primates, you can remove testicle and freeze it, and then later on implant it or get sperm out of it, and then implant the sperm, and that way they've been able to have fathered children. And so we have a study that's being funded, it's a multi-institutional study that is being funded also by a foundation, and it is giving families the option of having their child have their testicles saved, because it's not going to probably work in the future. That's why we're doing it. And then hopefully we'll have techniques in 10 years, 15 years, where we can actually use that frozen testicle and be able to have that child to be able to father a child.
Fantastic. So Dr. Bendel, the trial you're leading on brain tumors uses a cancer vaccine. Can you please just speak to what is a cancer vaccine and how is it part of our changing approach to childhood cancer?
So right now, and it may be different in other fields, but I feel like we've sort of reached kind of our limits of usefulness for the chemotherapy agents that we have. I mean, we can tweak it and we can figure out how to maybe deliver it more effectively, but really the chemotherapy agents, we know how they work. We've got a bunch of targeted agents, which have been helpful, but we need to invent more of those. So radiation and surgery have limitations also. And so what we're looking at is trying to harness the immune system, so your own immune system, to try to attack the cancer. And so it's much like the measles vaccine. When you get a measles vaccine, they take the protein from the measles virus and they inject it into you, and then your immune system says, hey, that doesn't belong here, and then it attacks that protein vaccine, but then it also makes a bunch of memory cells to say, okay, you guys remember this, because we don't ever want to see that measles virus again. And then if you get reinfected, then your immune system mounts another response and attacks that measles virus. So it's the same idea in that we take this is a brain tumor study, so it uses a vaccine that's made up of a bunch of different proteins that are on the surface of high-grade gliomas, and it's called diffuse midline glioma, which is a fatal tumor. Both of those are fatal tumors, at least the high-grade glioma is in its recurrent state. And what we've also learned, and this is actually through funding, through CCRF, through the University of Minnesota lab, that brain tumors are actually inherently resistant to vaccines, because brain tumors, particularly DMGs and recurrent high-grade gliomas, they secrete a protein called CD200, and CD200 turns off the immune system. So one of the issues with, if you want to use the immune system, it's not going to work. The immune system is turned off. And so scientists at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Allen, he made another something called a peptide, which is a small protein that is called CD200-ARL. And what it does is it activates those immune cells, even if they've been unactivated by the CD200. So this study is looking at using that vaccine, the GBM vaccine that has the multiple proteins on it, but then pairing it with this peptide that should overcome that inherent resistance. And then we also give a dose of radiation, which allows the cancer cells to expose the proteins on the surface so that they're more likely to get attacked. And we use this cream to help stimulate the immune system. And we do serial injections of it to then have the immune system recognize those proteins as foreign, then go to the brain, and they can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is needed, and then they can attack the tumor. And in the mouse models, the dog models, we saw really nice responses. And then now there was a small adult trial, and it showed that it was in recurrent high-grade gliomas in adults that had been heavily pretreated. But there was a subset of patients who had a really nice immune response, and a set of patients that didn't have an immune response, and it was probably due to their previous treatment. But the ones that had a really nice immune response, their survival was significantly longer. They're typically recurrent high-grade gliomas live about 3 to 4 months after they recurred, and the ones that didn't have a great immune response last 6 months. That was their survival rate. But the ones that had a nice immune response survived a mean of 26 months. So we're very excited, and the vaccine is actually kind of more aimed at pediatric DMG. So we're excited, and excited to have you guys helping fund us. So thank you.
Yes, and funding you through all of this support. So thank you. Dr. Turcotte, while childhood cancer survival rates we've talked about have increased overall, there are significant disparities in outcomes. Can you speak to some of those disparities and what researchers are learning about them?
Absolutely. So there's disparities just in how different disease types do. So we know that certain diseases like standard risk ALL has outcomes that exceed just about anything else. Kids are surviving 98% of the time compared to some of these diseases that Dr. Bendel is referring to that are uniformly fatal. So there's certainly disparities just in which types of diseases we've made progress in. Unfortunately, there's also disparities based on just people's social standings, and that's one of the areas that is probably more troubling. We know that children who come from lower socioeconomic status are less likely to survive cancer than children who come from more socially advantaged backgrounds. And that was an area that really struck me as really interesting and actually has been an area of research for me. And one of the things that we observed was that children who were receiving bone marrow transplantation who were of low socioeconomic status had much worse survival. And that led me to question, knowing that of those children who are getting bone marrow transplant, their immune system is being replaced by that of a donor. We actually look to see, does it matter if you're getting donor cells from individuals who are of lower socioeconomic status? Does that actually impact the outcome of our transplant recipients? And shockingly, we found that children who were receiving transplants from donors of low socioeconomic status had 10% worse survival compared to those who were receiving transplants from donors of high socioeconomic status, not related to them, no other connection. And so we've done additional research to look at how socioeconomic status actually impacts the gene expressions or how our genes are functioning. So we can actually see that in the genes, they upregulate inflammation, stress, chronic stress, loneliness, all of these things actually impact how our genes are expressed, and that actually impacts how the cells are responding to cancer therapies. So we're starting to understand that these social disparities are really impacting individuals down to their stem cells and down to a level that's really shocking. And I think when we think about interventions, these aren't simple cancer interventions, unfortunately. These are, public health interventions that need to happen. These are interventions on the level of, social disparities that we need to be targeting, because you never know which child is going to develop cancer or which individual is going to be tapped to be a stem cell donor.
Right. Fascinating. So cuts to federal funding for scientific research have been in the news a lot lately. From your point of views, both of you, what do you see as the effects of these cuts? How have you experienced these cuts on either researchers and or patients and families? And how can corporate philanthropy be part of that solution?
Yeah, I can speak as a division director of 20 physician scientists and basic scientists. We are heavily reliant on federal funding. So the University of Minnesota ranks 7th in the country in NIH funding in the Department of Pediatrics, which means so much of the work that we're doing is really dependent on funds from the National Institutes of Health. So when they're cutting large percentages of funding, it really hurts the work that we're doing. It hurts the progress that we're able to make for children. We look at the percentage in the National Cancer Institute. They give you an idea of what likelihood your grant is to be funded at a percentile. And so right now, at the grant that I received this winter from the National Institutes of Health scored at the 7th percentile, so it was in the top 7% of grants. And at that point, it was just at the pay line. And unfortunately, now they've reduced the pay line to the 4th percentile. And so, I have one of my very favorite colleagues who's doing leukemia research had a grant score at the 5th percentile, which unfortunately wasn't funded despite being a nearly perfect grant. It hurts. It really slows our progress. I think the impacts on children with cancer, on really all of us who are at risk for developing any disease, is huge. We're risking losing an entire generation of scientists because people aren't going to be able to maintain their labs. They aren't going to be able to continue to do this work. But more importantly, we're missing a whole generation of breakthroughs in our country. The work that we are doing, the breakthroughs that we're making in cancer, the progress that we've made in cancer can't continue if we don't have people who are able to do the work. And so when we think about the role of philanthropy and we think about the role of how foundations can help, it's amazing. And I review grants for many foundations, and I think as we've been hearing, there's been just a huge increase in the amount of grant applications that are coming in to foundations to fill this gap. And so when you know that you're unlikely to get a grant from the National Institutes of Health, you turn to any other source out there. CCRF is a huge one for the work that we all do, but they can only fund so much. They can only fund with what funds they have, and that's the challenge. And that's the same goes for so many of these foundations, but the impact is clear, and I think we'll start to see it very clearly in the coming 2 to 3 years as science is unable to progress.
Yeah, you said it all. I guess the only other thing is that the grants are very important for our clinical trials. And in the United States, there's sort of 2 main pediatric brain tumor consortiums that do the early clinical trials, take those what we call phase 1, phase 2 studies and try to see what's going to be effective. That's really cutting edge therapy. The one that is older is called Pediatric Brain Tumor Consortium. It was actually established in 1999 by the NCI, and they established it because they felt that there was a need to have more more effort put into pediatric brain tumors and not mixed in with all the other different subtypes, because they actually have truly different, unique needs. Their drugs don't penetrate into the brain as well. It's harder to do surgery. Radiation causes devastating effects, and we really needed to have dedicated neuro-oncology pediatric people looking at this question and running these trials. And so they started this, and so it's 26 years that it has been open. Most of their studies are federally funded. They've had 16 institutions, 42 studies over that 26 years, 2,200 or more patients have enrolled in the trials. And a month ago, their funding got nixed. They said that starting March of 2025, they will receive no further funding. So they had to stop enrollment on their studies. They don't know if they're going to be able to complete the studies on these patients. They don't know what's going to happen with the samples that have been sent, because they're being stored at facilities that are being funded by the NIH. The drugs that they're getting, they may have to stop taking them even if they are effective, because there's not funding for it. So it's quite devastating, and the NCI says that they're going to just plan to have a larger pediatric brain tumor kind of absorb those studies. But then it's not going to be the same speed at which we can get these answers. We're not going to be able to enroll. It's much more slow to run it through a huge consortium with multiple different interests versus a small consortium that is really looking at one true baby. And so fortunately the other large group, which we're part of, which is the Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium, which is the other phase 1, phase 2 study group, that is all funded not through the federal government, but through private foundations. And we do apply for some grants through the federal government, but we get a lot of private grants. And so our group is still able to run. All our studies are going strong. We're continuing to push studies through, but I think it's going to be harder to get grants for our studies because we don't have the federal government, so we have more competition with these foundations. So I think, we really appreciate everything that you do to help support the research, because we are not going to make any progress. The patients that have 0% cure when they're diagnosed with DMD, they're not going to be cured if we don't have research. That's the only way we're going to be able to move our field forward and improve the outcomes. So,
thank you for that. So, let's look to the hope. As you think about the next decade of pediatric cancer research, what do you think will get the most attention? And what are you most excited about in cancer research?
Okay. Well, I think I'm most excited about immune-based therapies, at least for pediatric brain tumors. I mentioned earlier, I feel like we can, there's only so much surgery we can do, and we can refine those surgical techniques, and we're doing that. But that's not enough. Surgery doesn't cure most of our tumors, even if we completely remove them. Radiation, we've got ways to make it be less toxic, but it's still toxic. And we don't know a way to not have it be toxic other than like trying to spare the normal brain. We still have to hit the areas to get in. And then chemo, really, I think we've made it, can tweak that a bit too, but I don't think we're going to make too much progress with chemo. So we need new ways, targeted therapies, which is aiming at the genetic changes within the tumors. I think that is very promising, but I think immune-based therapies is particularly promising because you can harness your own immune system. And heck, if I was able to get an immune response that then a month later when the tumor wanted to grow, got attacked again. 5 years later when the tumor wants to grow, it gets attacked again, and it keeps it under control lifelong without having to have, other than boosters, which typically are well tolerated. I think that would be great. There's much fewer side effects than what we see with our chemotherapy. There's different side effects, but much fewer side effects. It's given for infertility, don't have hearing loss, you don't have neuropathies. So I think that is what I hope that our immunotherapies, vaccine therapies, CAR T cell, I hope all of those continue to be more and more effective for various different types of tumors. And I mean, those therapies already are effective and actually are the standard of care in many adult tumors and some pediatric tumors too.
Well, you stole my answers this time. But I agree. I think the immune therapies are so exciting. Being able to actually take T cells in a patient who might have leukemia everywhere, but actually take their T cells, engineer them, and then 3 weeks later reinfuse them into their body so that they can go in and actually fight any of the cancers or kill the cancer cells that are there, but also stay present so that they're consistently circulating and constantly killing and capturing those cells over time is phenomenal. I mean,
That's called CAR T cell.
Yeah, that's CAR T. That's as a leukemia doctor, it's an amazing piece of progress that we have made. It doesn't work for all types of leukemia yet. It doesn't work for all types of cancer yet. And so I think it's, within our labs at the university, we're working on developing certain CAR T cells for different solid tumors that are more refractory as well. And I think that's going to be really exciting on the horizon. The other, I think as Dr. Bendel alluded to, the piece that also is really exciting and appealing as someone who's interested in survivorship is that these therapies come with so many fewer long-term effects. We don't fully understand what those long-term effects are yet because these therapies are relatively new, but that's one of the other really exciting opportunities that through a group that I work with, the Childhood Cancer Survivor Study, that's studying, thousands upon, 30,000 survivors right now, and we'll add another 10,000 survivors in the coming 5 years. We're getting some of these therapies. We'll be able to watch them now for the next 5 decades and see what happens to them long term in terms of how their immune system works after getting some of these immune therapies, understanding what kinds of chronic conditions they develop, understanding if they're at high risk for developing secondary cancers because of how we've altered their immune function. So I see so many interesting and important things coming in childhood cancer research. And we can only hope that the 85% that we're at right now for 5-year survival continues to push upward and becomes more equal across these different diseases so that some of these incurable diseases become curable.
So I want to have some time for audience questions. So Kenna can be passing mics for anybody who has some questions.
All right. Okay, good.
And who are you, Abby?
Hello, everybody. My name is Abby Miller. I am the chair of the CCRF board this year and next year, and so it's great to see everyone here this evening. So I have a question for Elizabeth. So we heard from our researchers about the importance of corporate giving for our research. So Elizabeth, from your standpoint, what's your perspective on corporate giving?
Thanks, Abby, and thank you for everything you do for CCRF. Corporate philanthropy, as all of you know, as the ones who are working in that space, it's changing a lot, has changed a lot of where companies want to give, how they want to give, the impact that they want to see, et cetera. And so the importance is for us to keep up with that, to be able to tell these stories and build the relationships with all of you so that you can see the impact of the work you do, and the impact of the dollars. Where I see it really coming into the highest impact is allowing us the ability to give more grants and our ability to drive more research that with funds that, while hard to tap, can often provide larger amounts of funding than a large group of individuals or individuals themselves. And the corporate giving, when we build those relationships well, can be longer sustaining than maybe an individual donor who is moved for a moment and then maybe is moved by another moment to another organization in 6 months. We can build these relationships with corporations and corporate philanthropy that are much more sustaining and long-term so that our sustainability is greater. And we can commit to long-term funding into the future.
Hi, Mackenzie Russ. I'm with the Minnesota Vikings. Just hearing you talk about the studies that you're doing, and obviously AI is such a buzz right now. How are you collaborating? I don't know as much in the space, but it sounds like there's more independent studies. So is there a push to collaborate more, to use some of the data that's being gathered, to have some of those broader conversations about how can you maybe be solving for something that's not part of a study, but that data can support a broader initiative?
I think that's a great question, and I think one of the things that's really unique about the childhood cancer community is how small it is. So even though we're at different hospitals, we're treating different patients, we're still collaborating on a very national level on the work that we do, both through things like the Children's Oncology Group, as well as many of the consortia that Dr. Bendel noted, and within the Childhood Cancer Survivor Study that I work with on a lot of the survivorship data, where we are using AI and a lot of kind of machine learning techniques to develop some of these risk prediction models that I mentioned. That's really a national resource. And so even though it initially started at the University of Minnesota, is now based at St. Jude, I have a leadership role in it. Folks at Seattle Children's have leadership roles in it, and it's open to investigators all over the country to use those data and collaborate and then come together and discuss how we're using the data. So I don't think you see that in a lot of other adulthood diseases where there's just so many different people doing so much work, but I think the collaboration in childhood cancer is probably one of the things that I like about it the most. I mean, we're a small community of researchers, we're a small community of hospitals, and people really want to do what's best for these children and develop cures and forward long-term outcomes.
Testing.
Thank you, first of all, for sharing your time and your wisdom. My name is Crippen Allen. I'm not sure if this is working. It's not. But okay, I can also just really project. 1, 2, 3.
She has some experience in projecting.
Okay, yeah, I know. I'm gonna just project if that's okay. So thank you again for sharing tonight. But my name is Carla, and I'm with Care 11, and really interested in what you just said regarding the lack of federal funding and how these researchers are literally seeing their laboratories perhaps close. When I've reported in the past on climate change, for example, and how we got out of that area, places like China were able to capitalize. What are you speculating will happen to anticipate some of these particularly younger researchers? You mentioned the next generation. Will they go elsewhere? Are they going to bide their time? Are we hoping for more private funding that will sustain their work? What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think within our group we have a number of very junior faculty, and they are basic scientists, working in a lab, so they don't have clinical background to sustain their work, and so they really are sort of in this point of their careers where if they can't quickly establish a certain level of funding, they won't be able to survive and continue in academia. What will happen to them? Some of them will likely go into industry and help with drug development or pharma type of research, which is great, but it's different from the work that we're doing at a university. Some of them may go into different areas of science, not necessarily in cancer research. Some of them may go abroad to work. I do think that we run the risk of other countries capitalizing on our deficiencies and really accelerating where we're decelerating. And I hope that that progress that they do makes its way here so that we can at least be using it to help our patients. But I think the science that we do so well, and we do it to the highest quality here. And so it's hard to see it not potentially happening here.
And our kids are here. I think a big piece of it. Any other? Well, thank you so much. Okay. Yes. Always.
That's okay, we'll make it. We share a lot.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Turcotte and Dr. Bendel, for sharing your expertise, your vision, and even your frustrations and your challenges, but most importantly, your passion for improving the lives of children with cancer. So thank you. And thank you once again to all of our partners here tonight. Your partnership and your generosity are what allows CCRF to invest in this research that you heard about tonight, so thank you. As we close, I do encourage you to carry tonight's stories and insights with you back home, back to work, back to your neighbors, back to your community. The more voices that we have advocating for children facing cancer, the faster progress will come, so thank you. And now let's spread a little bit of joy. I think we have a raffle. So we get to draw for our raffle winner for the 2-night staycation at the Four Seasons.
We can't win.
Numbers, not names. Number 388198. Yeah! Congratulations. We'll have your prize at the checkout table. So thank you. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Please stay, mingle, eat, drink, and don't forget to stop by the checkout table. We have a Kendra Scott piece of jewelry. Kendra Scott is one of our partners who wanted to provide something for each of you tonight to help us. Thank you for your support. So have a great night. Thanks for being here.